Howdy, and welcome to another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I'm your host, Daniel Dolphin. My guest today is Dr. Robert M. Miller. Dr. Miller is a veterinarian and Colorado State University grad, as well as an equine behaviorist. He is a world-renowned speaker and author on horse behavior and natural horsemanship. He is probably best known for his revolutionary full imprint training. He is also a cartoonist and humorist, the winner of the 2012 Western Horseman Award. He has been a judge for Road to the Horse. He is a co-founder of Light Hands Horsemanship, the concept and the clinics. He's a mule aficionado, the author of 23 books, including humor and cartoons, and equine learning and behavior and scientific papers to boot. At 94 years old, it is safe to say that he has seen many changes in the equine world, and I cannot wait to pick his brain. Dr. Miller, how are you doing this morning?
Very well, thank you.
Well, I have to say, this is a surreal experience for me. I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of interesting people in my life, but I don't know if I've ever been this nervous to have a conversation before. Well, we start off every podcast with the lightning round questions just to kind of loosen things up and so forth. And these are a little silly. So are you ready to go?
I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay. What is your favorite way to relax?
It may seem like an odd answer, but I'd say skiing.
Okay. Water skiing or snow skiing?
It's mentally relaxing.
Yes, sir. Are you a morning person or an evening person?
Both.
Do you prefer bay or sorrel?
Pardon me?
Bay or sorrel?
In colors?
Yes, sir.
For horses?
Yes, sir.
I don't go by color. That would be racial bigotry.
All right. Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I love pizza, but I like pineapple too.
Okay. That's a question, believe it or not, that a lot of people have very strong feelings about. The people that don't like pineapple on pizza are they're pretty passionate about that being a bad choice. Do you have any particular pet peeves?
Oh, too many to list.
You seem like a man that's filled with vitriol, so I believe that. Yes, sir. Lots and lots of pet peeves, I'm sure. Do you have a favorite beverage?
Several beverages I'm fond of, but because I can't single one out, I'd have to say water.
Can you tell us something unexpected about you? Like, I have to say, the snow skiing thing was not something I was expecting. Is there anything else about you that would just surprise a lot of people that know you from your writings and videos with horses and so forth?
Well, because cartooning has been a part of my life, people who know me as a veterinarian are often surprised that I'm also a cartoonist.
I find those things go together pretty well. In order to have the conceptual understanding of anatomy and physiology, you have to have that 3-degree visual type of a brain, which seems to lend itself to the art quite well. So I think that's a pretty good pairing.
Well explained.
Thank you. Okay, here's a pretty silly one. If you could have any superpower, what superpower would you choose?
Superpower. I'd need a lot of time to think about that because that's such an important thing to ask me if you had a superpower. So I hesitate to answer that without giving it deep thought.
We can come back to it. That's no problem. Again, I'm sitting here. I'm realizing some of these questions seem normal with a lot of people, but I just asked a legend a silly question you'd ask a 4-year-old, and I'm sure I'm red right now. Are you a person who tends to be more of a thoughts or a feelings type of a person? Are you more cerebral or more intuitive?
I think that both qualities are so closely related, couldn't differentiate between them.
Okay.
Both, I'd say.
Do you have a favorite piece of tack or horse-related tool? Anything that's maybe sentimental to you or just has special value?
My wife is nodding her head.
Well, she's certainly welcome to pipe in here too. There's no problem with that.
The first thing that occurs to my mind is the hackamore, because even in my youth, I found that to be a humane way of starting horses and not punishing the mouth excessively. So the traditional rawhide hackamore, although it can be misused as well, but it at least doesn't damage the mouth.
Yes, sir. Do you have a favorite book or movie? I know for people that are writers, that's a really hard question because you probably have 100.
I have many, many, many favorite books. So I find it difficult to just pick one. Or did you say or movie?
Yes, sir. Either way. Or even a category, like do you tend to read nonfiction more than fiction, or are you a fan of bubble gum for the brain every once in a while, or what?
No, I'm much more of a nonfiction reader, although certain fictions at certain phases of my life impressed me a great deal. For example, when I was, before I was in my teens, I was very fond of reading stories about the sailing ships days, which I don't own a sailboat, but I went through a phase when that fascinated me.
Certainly.
And I read everything I could get in the library about that historical period and many other things. I was reading long before I ever selected my profession. I was very fond of animal books, especially if they were not fiction. They were nonfiction books. The books of Carl Akeley about his African adventures, Akley, was one of my favorite authors as a boy.
We're back into the silly once again. What is your favorite dinosaur? Okay.
We're back together.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry about that. We are out in the country and our internet is not the greatest in the world.
So it's the same problem. We just got internet. We only had it a few weeks.
The same for us. We only solved that problem when COVID came and the kids had to do virtual schooling, and it's a satellite type deal, so it's not real good.
There's only 4 homes out here that are able to get it. We got lucky. We're one of them.
Yeah, we're in a beautiful, isolated, rustic canyon, and we've been here
45 years.
45 years in this house.
Wow. Okay, well, our next question for you is, again, a little bit of a silly one. What is your favorite dinosaur?
Well, I've never actually tasted dinosaur. So when you say favorite, we're not talking about flavor.
Alligator, technically, I guess there are a few that are still around. So, but no, sir, if you just have any inclination or attraction to a dinosaur whatsoever, which would it be?
Tyrannosaurus Rex.
My wife just said Tyrannosaurus Rex, but thinking as a veterinarian, I think I'm filled more with fear than admiration.
Yes, sir. And then have you ever had a UFO encounter?
No.
Well, we've actually had about 50-50. About 50% of the people do think they have seen a UFO at some point, and about half have not. So that's way more than I ever expected to have a yes for that question.
Yeah, I'm surprised that 50%. That's amazing.
Yes, sir. So we arbitrarily award points for this. I'm going to give you the highest score so far. I'm going to give you 163 points, which entitles you to a coupon for 50% off of a unicorn, valid wherever unicorns are sold. So we'll get that in the mail to you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Well, Dr. Miller, I hate to ask a huge abstract question, but would you, in your own words, give us an overview of your life and career as it pertains to veterinary medicine and natural horsemanship and all of that? How did your life progress through there?
Well, I was not born on a farm. Didn't live on a farm, but my father spent his youth working on a farm. And so his stories, especially about horses, influenced me. I think that's is what aroused my interest in horses and agriculture. I was always an avid reader. Would walk 2 miles to the closest library to get books. And overwhelmingly, they were about animal life. So by the time I was in my teens, World War II had started. And in the last year of the war, I went into the Army. I was 18, trained in the infantry. And when I finished my infantry training, the war ended. I jokingly used to say they saw me coming, so they surrendered. And I served overseas for a year in the Army of Occupation. Before I went in the Army, I was working on farms as a volunteer wartime leader for an organization that looked for boys from high school willing to work for a very small salary because there was a labor shortage due to the war. So I was very happy with that, working with draft horses and with dairy cattle. After the war, I decided to go to college. My family was living in Tucson, Arizona. So I signed up on the GI Bill for the School of Agriculture, the major in animal husbandry. Didn't know what I was going to do with it. Never occurred to me to be a veterinarian. I had no exposure to veterinary medicine and knew nothing about it. But I was interested in animals. I'd worked after school for a kennel, pet shop, and on my summers working with farm jobs. So I did have a varied animal background. And once I started the University of Arizona School of Agriculture, my second week of school, one of my teachers, Dr. William Pister, was a veterinarian. And he was teaching a required course in animal husbandry. And one day he started to reminisce about his practice days. By the time the class was over, I thought, that's what I ought to be doing. I ought to go on to veterinary school. So that became my goal. I applied to every school in the United States. The GI Bill rush was tremendous. So I was consistently turned down. I was told it's not necessary to have a college degree to get into veterinary school, but it would certainly be an asset. And once I got my degree in agriculture, with a major in animal husbandry, I applied again. And this time I had selected Colorado School as the one I wanted to go to. The reason for it was because I love the mountains and I love skiing. I just started skiing when I was in Europe, in the Alps. It became a lifetime passion. So I focused on Colorado at school because of the Rocky Mountains and skiing. Somebody told me that if I was a legal resident of the state of Colorado, I'd have a better chance of getting in with the enormous competition from the GI Bill. So I moved to Colorado. I am trying to recall what I did. I know what I did, but I can't recall what I started doing. But I started job hunting in Colorado and visited the Denver Zoo because I had a lifelong interest in animals of all kinds. I had a degree in animal husbandry. So I went to the zoo director and asked, was there a possibility of a job? He said, absolutely. He says, you're very well qualified. I was thrilled. I was going to be a zookeeper. I said, when do I start? He said, oh, there's 62 qualified applicants ahead of you. He says, you're on the list, but he said, there are no openings at this time. But he suggested the city of Denver. It had 2 full-time occupied veterinarians. And I said, why? He said, well, he says, they operate the dog pound. So I went there. I applied. They were happy with me. They said, the only opening we have, he says, will be working for our chief veterinarian, Dr. Anderson. I hadn't mentioned the fact that my real goal was veterinary school in the state of Colorado. And so I immediately said, yes, that's fine. I'd be very happy to work for him. The officer squinted at me and said, it's working for the dog pound. I said, oh, great. He said, as a dog catcher. That was a surprise to me, but I said, fine. He said, it only pays, if I remember correctly, I think it was $227 a month, I think. Is that right? Well, I was more interested in what the job would be doing than I was the salary. And so for 1 year, I worked for Dr. Anderson. I set the record for the capturing unwanted dogs, stray dogs, 27 in one day.
Dang. That's quite a few.
And Dr. Anderson became a mentor and a personal friend. I know he wrote to Colorado A&M University School of Veterinary Medicine. I never saw the letter, but it probably was a major factor in my acceptance. After 1 year of dog catching, I became a veterinarian, a veterinary student.
You should add that to the bio on your website that you held the record for the most dogs caught in a day in Colorado. Or I think that would be a nice tidbit to add on there.
Yeah, I even made the newspapers in Denver as Colorado's roping dog catcher. I was an avid calf roper in ag school at the University of Arizona. So I was roping some dogs that couldn't be caught otherwise. So I made a big newspaper spread.
Well, that's pretty neat. What about after vet school? You were involved in writing some scientific papers and so forth. Was that during the vet school process or years after? Did you spend some time in the academic or research world, or how did that come about?
Through my 4 years of veterinary school, I spent all of my summers working on ranches and for the U.S. Forest Service, working with horses. I had not decided to limit my practice career to horses because I liked all kinds of animals. I didn't do anything significantly great through veterinary school. But I got through, got my degree, and met my future wife in my senior year, just a few months before I graduated. She got her bachelor's degree. At the same time, I got my doctor of veterinary medicine degree. She went home to California. I went home to Arizona. Our plans were to get married down the line after I had a job. I found a job in the little town of Tonka Verde, east of Tucson. It had a population then of 200 people. And the local veterinarian who treated everything, cattle ranches, horses, and the local dogs and cats, and even a pet raccoon. He burned out and was prospecting for uranium. Wanted somebody to take his practice over for a year. I did so. Two things came out of it. One was confirmation that this is the kind of practice I wanted. All kinds of animals, included horses, but not limited to horses. Secondly, that this was a 24/7 occupation, night and day. And I thought, how can I enjoy this type of practice and still have time to raise a family, to pursue my many interests in life, including skiing? And I thought the answer would be a group practice. Well, that's very common today, but the group practices in veterinary medicine were a rarity back then. I couldn't find one in Arizona except for one that was a father and son type thing. It was 3 generations practicing together. Mm-hmm. And I took a few days off, went out to California, got married. We had 2 days of honeymoon and went back to Tonka Verde, where she learned what it's like to become a solo practitioner's wife in a very mixed practice, which means night and day.
Yes, sir.
And I told her, I don't know where I can find a group practice. I can't locate anything in Colorado or here in Arizona. I was offered one position in a small strip, but it was straight 6-doctor practice, but strictly small animal, which I didn't want to limit myself. So she said, have you checked California? Well, I'd worked one summer on a ranch in California, the Irvine Ranch. And while I enjoyed that summer's job, I hadn't fallen in love with California, but I realized the opportunities and the varied agricultural industries in the state of California. So I thought, well, I can't consider California unless I get licensed there. So when my 1 year's job as a relief veterinarian ended, we drove out to California. I took the state board, and then we zigzagged back and forth across the entire state of California, heading south, and interviewing at many practices, but not finding an opportunity in a group practice. I found one that I liked real well in Santa Ynez, California. He had just hired a veterinarian, made it a 3-doctor group, and he said to me, he said, are you a horseman? I said, yes. I said, that happens to be my favorite species. Then he said, I just hired a man, and he's very, very well qualified, but has no background in horses. So I thought, what is he going to do? Fire that guy or take a second intern on? He said, well, it'll probably be 2 or 3 years before we need somebody else. Anyway, we finally made it down to Los Angeles, where my wife's parents lived. Her dad was a general practitioner, physician, an MD. We moved in with them for a while I job hunted. Spent the first week interviewing, found nothing. Group practices were a rarity back then. He said, what do you want to do Sunday? you can't job hunt on Sunday. I said, well, I heard about this Disneyland. I said, let's go see it. So we went to Disneyland. I was fascinated. Another week went by, job hunting. And I said, well, we went to Disneyland last Sunday. What are we going to do this Sunday? She said, well, what do you want to do? I said, well, when we were in school together in Colorado, I said, you talked about this Conejo Valley and the town of Thousand Oaks and described what a beautiful rural area it was. And you said it was a round trip day's bus ride, and then you boarded a horse out there. So you'd take the Greyhound bus out, ride for a couple of hours, and then take the Greyhound bus. It's just I spent my Saturdays doing that. I said, well, let's go out there and look at it. I said, I'm tired of living here in the city. So we drove out to Thousand Oaks, and by now a freeway had been constructed. So it was not half a day's drive. It was about an hour and a half to get out there. Mm. And when I saw this beautiful rural valley, an attractive small town in it, my wife said, I'd like to go to the ranch where I used to board my mare. This mare had been moved to another ranch up in Northern California. And as we went into the ranch, I saw a billboard along the highway. It said, residential lots for sale, 2.5 acres, $7,500 and up. And after our visit there, Debbie said, what do you want to do now? I said, I want to explore this town because I think this thing is about to grow. This was the first sign of subdivision in this community. Thousand Oaks had 1,200 people at the time. The only other town in the valley was Newbury Park, which had been established during the 19th century and had 200 people. We explored the town. Besides a half dozen huge cattle ranches, a dozen horse farms, it had a zoo, Jungle Land Zoo, with a huge variety of animals in it. And they supplied the movie industry, which was about a 2-hour drive back then, with any kind of creature you want. Plus, there were individuals in the town that owned several animals or several kinds of animals, waiting for a call from Hollywood that they needed this, that. It was Bird Wonderland. What was there? Was a snake farm?
I don't know the name of the snake farm.
Yeah, there was a reptile place. And then Jungle Land itself. I went down and explored Jungle Land Zoo. Tremendous zoo with an elephant herd. There was a camel breeding farm. A huge animal population, despite the lack of people in the valley, and no veterinarian. I stopped in at the one pharmacy in town, introduced myself. He said, are you looking for a location? I said, well, I wasn't until today. I wasn't considering this. I'd been looking for a location. And, but I said, I hadn't considered this area. I was just visiting. And he said, we need a veterinarian out here. He says, we've got a tremendous animal population, but we don't have a local veterinarian. He says, veterinarians are coming from 30 to 50 miles away to serve these various things, including the zoo and other wild animal facilities. And he said, if you locate here, he says, I'll take out this wall, one whole wall of the drugstore with veterinary supplies. He was trying to help the community.
Yes, sir.
Then he went to a journey, came out with an otoscope, an ear instrument, and an alligator forceps. And he says, I try to help these people out here because, he says, the grass-ons, that we call them foxtails, get in the dog's ears. And he says, it takes these instruments to get them out. And he says, I tried to help them, but he said, I don't have much luck. He said, I'll give you these instruments. He says, if you locate it here. So that was the moment I decided I couldn't find a group practice, even in California, but I could create one here. I saw the growth potential and the variety of animals. So the zoo, which was called Jungle Land, and the various farms, it took a while to build a practice there, but we did. And mission accomplished. I retired in 1987, 12 doctor group.
Wow.
When I was 60 years of age. 60 years of age. I could have gone on practicing, and financially I should have, but I had made it to the speaking circuit by that time because of my writing, my articles, brought speaking invitations. And while it was not financially profitable, my wife and I decided it was an interesting life. So we've been on every continent, been all over the world, have made connections and friends all over the world, have had a very, very adventurous life.
Yes, sir. That's a far more romantic tale than I was expecting it to be. I have to say that's something. My oldest son is 15 right now, and he believes he wants to be a veterinarian. I'm going to make sure he listens to this and listens to your fortuitous life there, and who knows, maybe he'll be doing something similar to that in the future. That's really quite neat.
I want to encourage him because if you have the basic love for animals, to work with animals, it's a great career. It's fascinating. I wouldn't have, if I could live my life over, I'd have done exactly the same thing. It was a good decision for me. But what I wanted to say was one of my books is something your son wouldn't enjoy. And it's called, Yes, We Treat Aardvarks.
Wow. That's perfect. That I guess only in California would you come across something like that with the movie business background and so forth. That's cool.
So if he's interested in this profession, he'll enjoy that book.
Yes, sir. Well, why don't we dip our toe in the deep water of your biggest claim to fame, I guess, at least as far as I am aware, and that is the full imprint training. How did that come about for you, and what was your inspiration to travel that path?
Well, there was a European scientist who coined the term imprint training.
Conrad Lorenz.
Yes, Conrad, spelled with a K, Lorenz, Lorenz. And he came up with this concept that certain species, not every species, but certain species at birth are imprinted with what they see and hear and helps them to stay alive. That interested me. And I wondered if it applied to the horse. And found out that it did, that horses at birth, what they see and hear and experience in those first hours of birth leave a permanent impression, and that other animals imprint as well. So I came up with this method of training horses at birth. What they see, they can see at birth and hear and probably smell, experience, lasts a lifetime. It helps them to stay alive in the wild. Imprinting in some species is delayed. In dogs, for example, it occurs between 7 and 8 weeks of age. But if you think of it, the puppy is born, it can't see, it can't hear, so its learning is extremely limited, whereas the horse is a precocial species. All senses are functioning at birth. It's a prey animal, and if it weren't for that, they couldn't survive. They have to be programmed by nature to recognize their mother and the herd and stay with them in order to stay alive at birth. And so, since I loved horses and worked with horses, I experimentally developed a method of working with newborn foals as soon as possible after birth, before they even get to their feet, and desensitizing them to all kinds of things sensitizing to other things, and found that lasts a lifetime. And eventually, I was writing for the Western Horseman magazine, did a couple of articles. They wanted me to do a book on the subject, which I did, Imprint Training of the Newborn Foal. And that led to all kinds of opportunities, and it added my second career of teaching, the lecture circuit. Came out because of that book. I'm still involved with that. In my 90s now.
Yeah, well, that's why we're talking. I definitely consider you a relevant figure right up to this minute. So I have a Facebook group, and I posited to them that I was going to be speaking with you, and if they had a few questions. So I'm gonna read a couple of their questions that has to do with this subject right now. One was whether or not the imprint training also pertains to mules and donkeys and other equids. Is there any differentiation there in your experience?
No, it applies to all equines and many other species, especially prey species, have early imprint training, whereas the predatory species, the hunters, it's delayed. Human babies, we're a predatory species. The dog family, the cat family, imprinting is delayed.
One of the little tidbits that I happen to know here is with zebras. You know, the zebras are designed to be camouflaged into the herd. So when the baby zebra is born, the mother circles it and the baby gets imprinted with the mother's stripe pattern. And from then on can recognize its mother from, you know, the other 3,000 striped zebras right there. And I guess that's imprinting at its core, is it gets that barcode fashion. Yes, sir.
Because of the Jungle Land Sioux, I have imprinted newborn zebras very successfully.
Well, one of the questions that we had is imprint training basically desensitizing, and can it be overdone? Can you desensitize too much? What would you have to say about that?
I wouldn't say it overdone, but it can be done improperly. It can be done wrongly because they will imprint with negative experiences as swiftly as they will with positive experiences. And so the only book I'd published on that was The Western Horseman, after a couple of articles, as I said earlier, asked me to do a book on imprint training, which I did. It's called Imprint Training of the Newborn Foal, and it applies to donkeys and zebras as well as horses.
And another question that we had from the group is, your method of imprinting the same now as it was then, or has it gone through an evolution and you've changed or added or taken away any things, or would you say it's pretty much still the same thing you were doing 30 years ago?
I'd have to think quite a while on this. Let me ask my wife, because she's been with me on this entire project.
Basically,
yes, sir.
Same.
It's the same, isn't it?
For you, but other people have taken it to extremes, and we try to modify that.
Yeah. No, we haven't had a newborn foal now for several years, but we've raised quite a few foals, both mules and horses, and had consistent success with imprint training. But it also works in other prey species, cattle.
Yes, sir.
For example, and elephants, rhinoceros, which is a dangerous large animal.
Yes, sir.
But it's basically a prey animal. And so one of our favorite pictures was taken in Africa after I retired from practice. We were on a wildlife preserve, and there was a wild rhinoceros. It was handled by a native employee as soon as it was born. It was still on the ground. It hadn't gotten up yet, but it was cold. It was on the slopes of Mount Kenya. So he dried it off and spent time fooling with it. And it's been attached to humans ever since. So there's Debbie and I with a full-grown bull rhinoceros in the wild, and we're standing with our arms around it.
That's an experience you just can't buy right there.
We have pictures and a video of it.
That's incredible. It really is. So this next question, I'm going to just preface with, don't be afraid to get more technical on this, because I do a lot of talking with my group about neurology and oxytocin and things like that. So don't feel obligated to keep this simple. You can go full veterinarian on us with this one. But what, neurologically speaking, would you say imprinting is? Like level of the brain, limbic system, and that type of thing. And how would you say it correlates? Like, for instance, when a human mother has a baby, they immediately want to put the baby skin to skin on the mother's chest, try to get it nursing, try to begin bonding at that point. And we know that there's an oxytocin release, and that's part of the bonding of all of that. Would you say it's a similar experience with the animal, or are there some differences in there? What would be your thoughts?
Well, it's all a question of the process of evolution. So obviously, if you go back in time, and we're using the horse as an example of a prey species. Now, obviously, the full-grown horse is capable of defending itself. It can kick, it can strike, it can run away, it can bite. But the newborn foal is absolutely helpless. And in the environment in which equines live, similar to deer, wild cattle, and many other species, they're completely helpless at birth. So natural selection occurred. Those that were, as soon as possible, learned to follow mom and to rely upon her for protection, as contrasted with helpless young, like puppies, kittens, wolf cubs, lion cubs, human babies. Those that were, as early as possible, were able to stand, to run, to keep up with mom and follow her and stay with her, perpetuated that behavior. So evolution is what it's all about. And certain species evolved. They're called precocial species. Their imprinting period is right after birth, as soon as possible, in order to stay alive. Now, that's not true. That's not true of puppies, because mom is able to protect them. She's got weapons, the cat family. And it's not true of human babies, because the babies can be protected, even though they're completely helpless. So that's how evolution developed imprinting in certain species, prey species especially.
So how large of a window is that after birth? Is it hours, days? I mean, I know ideally the sooner the better, but how long is too long where we lose the effect?
Well, I spread this information into my practice, so I have actually imprinted hundreds and hundreds of foals at birth, because I would, when I was called out, the mare's in labor, she's foaling, we need a vet. And I'd go out there, and the foal was either near birth or had just been born. And I would say to the owner, would you like to see what I'm doing with my foals? I put it that way, because if they were to say no, I would just drop the subject.
Yes, sir.
They never said no. They always said, well, yeah, curiously. And so I would go through the process. Now, I didn't charge them for the time it took, because it takes with a newborn foal, it takes anywhere from a half an hour to an hour to get the job done. But I knew that foal would be a good patient from that point on. I benefited by it.
An investment of your time. Yes, sir. So how large of a window is, like if you're a day late or 2 days late or 3 days late?
By 3 or 4 days, you're beyond the imprinting period.
Okay.
But they continue for the first day or two, they continue to learn.
One of the questions and oddity about me is that I am an apprentice falconer. And in the falconry world, imprinting is one of the somewhat controversial subjects. It is relatively common to purchase parent-reared young, but there are quite a few species where they don't advise imprinting because the birds can become somewhat dangerous to the falconer. They'll have no fear of humans, and thus they're willing to fight you for game and things like that, just as they would another hawk. And as an aside on that, when I grew up as a young boy, my grandfather raised birds and a variety of birds, everything from macaws and toucans down to parakeets. And so the larger, more valuable birds we tended to hand rear and I guess essentially imprint those birds as well. And of course, the hand reared babies would bring more money and they would be extremely comfortable with people and well adjusted within the home. Did the bird world or the avian world, I guess, have any influence on you with this foal imprinting? Or I know you talked about Mr. or Dr. Conrad, but did any of this come from the avian world, I guess is my question.
My experiences with mammals.
Okay.
There's no question that it applies to the avian world, but I didn't personally get involved with that.
Well, Dr. Miller, it is time for us to do the sponsor for this episode.
Imprinted on wheelbarrow and an oak tree.
My wife is trying to.
Can I remind him of something?
Yeah.
He's had some imprinted foals that imprinted on a wheelbarrow that was running by them, and oak tree that was blowing in the wind. They were actually imprinted on those two objects.
Yes. On a windy day, I've had a couple of experiences with foals that were born under the tree, and the shaking of the leaves, they're immediately imprinted. And when they were several months old, they'd leave the tree, but always come back to that tree. That tree was a place of safety to them because they saw that movement when they were born. That's how powerful this imprinting phenomenon is.
Well, it is time for the sponsor of this episode. And Dr. Miller, I always try to tailor our sponsor for the guest. So since you're in the behavior and horsemanship realm, this episode is sponsored by Dr. Silken Tongue's Horsemanship Clinician College. This is where we teach you how to buy the biggest truck and trailer for the most impressive entrance to your clinics. We'll teach you how to wear a starch shirt and jeans 7 days a week without chafing any sensitive parts. We'll teach you to learn the art of giving just enough information to people go home and get nearly killed so they have to buy your next book or DVD. We'll show you how to stand at just the right angle for optimum camera, picking up your good side. We'll show you how to keep at least one of your horses eating one of every major feed supplier's feeds in the country. So if they ever sponsor you later, you can claim you've been feeding their feed for at least 10 years. We'll show you how to move to a country where your accent will overcome any flaws in your skills. And we'll show you how to answer questions without saying anything remotely offensive. We have a 17-day intensive marketing course. And we will also give you advice on prenuptial agreements so that when you get to your fourth wife, you will still have something left. That's Dr. Silken Tongue's Horsemanship Clinician College. So thank you.
My only comment is you better hurry because in 2 months, I'll be 95.
Oh.
It's possible there's a reverse imprinting occurs as you age. And that is, you start to lose your learning power.
Yes, sir. Well, I think the most fun of having this podcast is getting to make up the fake sponsor for each episode. I always enjoy that. I guess getting somewhat off of the imprinting, you also have a pretty extensive catalog of body language decoding. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Of body language?
Decoding, sort of explaining snapping, for instance, and ear pinning and those sorts of things. You're fairly well known for explaining what the horse's body language means. I find that to be one of the weaknesses of a lot of people is just they don't read horses quite well enough. So what resources would you recommend to people to learn to read horse body language better?
Well, first of all, on the subject of body language, understanding body language, I am not a teacher. I'm a student. So I feel like there's always more to learn. In fact, watching the first of your videos last night, I learned a little about equine body language, talking about quivering of the mouth.
Yes, sir.
And things like that. So I learned some stuff from you.
That's very flattering. I appreciate you saying that.
And I'm looking forward to seeing all of those videos. That was just the first one.
I hope you enjoy them. I think the body language part might be the part I'm most proud about in the whole video because, as you saw there's a lot of dogmatic stuff that runs contrary to reality that I wish more people were aware of, and think it would make the horse world a better place if we realized that stuff. Anyway, you've got me all flustered now. I could die a happy man. I think my month has probably been made at this point in time. Okay, so here would be a question that I would have for you. One of the sort of controversial topics right now, there are more and more trainers that are starting to use positive reinforcement. And an argument that I have heard made that I try to look at objectively, and I'm not sure that I can find evidence for, is that horses within the herd environment positively reinforce one another regularly. And I can think of a few instances of body language, one of them being a dam with a foal, where they do sort of reassuring gestures and so forth. And then, of course, where two horses would face opposite directions and massage each other on the necks. But beyond those few signs, I can't really think of many exhibitions of equine body language that is positive or reinforcing in nature. Does anything spring to your mind that would add to that list? Is there something I'm missing there?
While you were speaking, I was thinking, what could I possibly add to this? But my wife is sitting here nodding her head up and down very vigorously, so I'm going to let her offer her explanation, her answer to your question.
Well, advance and retreat. If a horse gives a signal that it's going to do something wrong and the other horse yields to pressure, then it's rewarded.
Yes, ma'am. I guess what I'm trying to, one of the things that I talk about a lot is that I think the novice horse person tends to have a very romanticized version of what a horse is in their brain. And I'm a more analytical type of a person. And so when I think of equine body language, I can come up with 3 or 4 signs that horses give one another through touch of friendship and so forth. And I can come up with about 20 different signs of threats and violence where, the cocking of a leg or a tail or pinning of the ears. And so that's one of the things I try to say. I think a lot of people that are out teaching have a little more of an idealized peace and love and unicorn sort of a way of looking at it. And I think it's important to recognize that within the horse language structure, there's 4 times more signs of threats and violence than there are of love and acceptance. And I just think it's important to be aware of that, I guess. My little dose of reality for the day. But I was curious. I mean, I believe you to be a true student of the horse and a person who's very conscious of equine body language. In fact, I was watching to prepare for this a video that you have of you with the hard to catch mule, and I find your timing to be impeccable. Which is another question that I have for you. I think timing is one of the most overlooked and important aspects of horsemanship. You can have a good understanding theoretically, but if your timing is poor, you're going to have very limited success. So as a person with impeccable timing, do you have any tips for horse people out there that are learning and working on their timing as to how they can improve that?
Well, the first word that occurs to me is patience. Patience affects our timing, and impatience is detrimental to good training. So one of the keys to being a successful trainer is to have patience. And the other thing is empathy, the feeling for the individual we're working with, so that we're not demanding instant response. But if we're patient and empathetic, we can see the hesitancy in the animal, and we can reassure that not by becoming more aggressive, but actually by easing, slowing it down.
Well, I feel like I'm dragging on here and I'm talking too much, so I'll try to be a little more succinct and get us through this so that you can go. One of the other questions that was posited for you was on your thoughts of nurture versus nature. And this is a question I continually get asked, but I thought with regard to the imprint training, that really adds another layer to it. So what are your thoughts there?
I'm not sure what you.
Well, I guess there's a constant debate as to whether the genetics of a certain animal are more powerful or the environment that the animal is raised in is more powerful. And I don't know that we'll ever come up with an answer there, but obviously the imprint training is changing the game on the nurture side, where we've affected the conditions that the animal is in and their perception of the world around them. So I guess that would be my thought, is that you're more on the nurture side than the nature side. One of the things I think of, I have a cutting horse background, and there was a particular family that was customers, and they had this one old mare, and I probably started 10 of her colts, and every one of them was really, really bad to buck. And I think that mare just had genetics that were prone to bucking. And I don't really know that anything you could have done to the foals were all raised in the same environment, the same paddocks, weaned the same way, halter broken by the same people. But this one particular mare's colts were always really, really bad. So I guess that's the nurture versus nature debate, whether the genetics can be overcome by the environment or whether the environment will be overcome by the genetics.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. And here,
can I say something? Monty Roberts had a mare that had 13 foals. The first 6 or 7 literally killed themselves until they finally started imprinting, and that there was no more problems after that. And Monty told us a story. I mean, every one of these foals were just, they were so bad they actually died, several of them. But then after they started imprinting them, there was no more problems.
I don't recall that story, but Monty Robert is a great horseman, and I was interested that you remember him saying that.
It was a long time ago, so I may not have all the details correct, but I remember it was something to that, similar to that.
That's interesting.
They're all outlaws.
One of the requirements, I think, of a great teacher, whether you're a school teacher with kids or a horse trainer, a dog trainer, any kind of an animal trainer, on up to a college professor, if you don't identify with your student, if you don't have that capacity to understand the student's lack of understanding, fear, the desire to please, it's called empathy. If we don't have that, we don't have the makings of a good trainer. And people like you and I, who trained horses, and then we've seen the extremes. We've seen even professional trainers who rely upon force and punishment as an important training tool. And then at the other extreme is a person who absolutely doesn't want to use anything like that and is too permissive. So it takes good judgment to be a good teacher, whether you're teaching your fellow humans or some other species.
Yes, sir. Well said. Well said. Moderation in all things, including moderation. I did want to talk with you a little bit about your cartoonist and humorist side. You've got several books that you have written there, and I know you did many cartoons for the Western Horseman magazine. How big of a part of you is that? I mean, you even do it to the degree you use your initials when you author those types of books and cartoons. Is that like a secret persona of yours, just trying to get out and it has to peek out behind the curtain every once in a while, or how does that work out for you?
I'm not exactly sure, but I didn't start cartooning early in life, but I know I was trying to draw pictures. I have a certain amount of artistic talent, but pretty early on, it expressed itself more in cartoons than it did in serious type of art. You made an observation here I was going to comment on, but I forget now what I was going to say.
When he first went into practice, he didn't want people to think, he didn't know he was a cartoonist, so that's why he started using his initials.
Yes.
He wanted to be a serious veterinarian.
Yes. I started cartooning when I was cartooning for Western Horseman magazine, for example, and other animal publications. I didn't want people to know I was a cartoonist. So instead of signing off as Robert Miller or Dr. Robert Miller or Robert Miller DVM, I signed off as RMM. Later on, I realized that was a foolish concern. I didn't have to be concerned about that.
I think you could view yourself as a pioneer there. There are quite a few veterinarians now that have a sideline of writing interesting things or cartooning and so forth. And you said something a second ago about, or your wife may have said it, about being considered a serious veterinarian. All of my favorite veterinarians are not serious people at all. So I'm glad that you took the cartoon line there.
Well, I think you need a sense of humor to enjoy veterinary medicine, because there's so many frustrating and sad aspects to it. But a sense of humor is helpful.
You got the humor from your patients in practice.
Well, yes, quite a bit of it. It comes from the patients or from the owners.
I did have a question. I know I've taken up a lot of your time. I'm trying to wind it down here, but as a veterinarian and as a horseman, you've obviously had many interactions where you didn't have the opportunity of imprinting, and yet you're now working with a fully grown horse, and you have to have a method of developing a rapport with that animal, because you may be expecting to do something that's going to cause it pain or something like that, and it has to remain manageable and safe for everybody. So what would be some of the things that you are looking for as you approach a new animal, and what would be some of the rapport building skills that you would employ when handling a new animal?
Well, obviously, as a veterinarian, you're presented with many patients every single day of your life. We're dealing with horses now. I'm just talking about horses,
sure,
although it does apply to other species. That I'm being distracted here.
3 points of contact. 3 points of contact.
Well, that's a physical thing. My wife just wrote a note and held it up in the air. 3 points of contact.
Yes, sir.
That's part of my teaching methods. Has been working with horses. They're obviously large and powerful animals. They can injure us, and I've been injured. Anybody who works with horses has inevitably been injured. Many veterinarians have been injured, some very seriously, by their horse patients. And so one answer to that is, when approaching the horse, is to look for the horse's response. If I see apprehension, a fear response, the horse's expression shows that. You worry me. I'm afraid of you. You smell like a veterinarian. My immediate response to that is to back off and slow down. Slow down, look away, because staring at the animal is aggressive. That's predatory. You stare. Just by visibly cocking my head away and looking, and then turning my body somewhat at an angle so I'm not facing. And then as soon as I see relaxation occurring, I'll step in a little closer. And let's suppose that what I want to do is listen to the horse's belly with my stethoscope, and that I see visible fear. Instead, I'll direct myself towards the shoulder. And once I have that area reassured, I stroke the horse and I see relaxation occurring. Then I'll turn towards the flank and I'll start moving towards the flank rather than going in there immediately, getting a big fear response, putting a twitch on the horse, forcibly restrain it. Sometimes that's necessary, but much of the time I find I can get done what I needed to do with the horse. Even an injection, it hurts to stick a needle in the skin. Even of a big animal like a horse, a tiny needle hurts. So I experimentally pretend at first. If I see continued fear response, then I'm going to have to change my tactics. But if I see fear and then, oh, you scared me, but that feels good. So approach the needle and then use a little distracting motion, insert the needle. The secret of getting along with horses.
Yes.
I know, having worked on all kinds of ranches in several states, that some people, they not only provoke reaction and fear from the horse, but they seem to enjoy it. They enjoy the fight, as long as they win. I want to avoid the fight if possible. So most of the time, I've been able to get the horse to trust me if I take a little time. And I use a little intelligent way of approaching the horse, not being too abrupt, distracting it a little bit. It's an art.
To me, you're describing horsemanship in general. People that have a good vet that has horsemanship probably doesn't have to twitch nearly as many horses to accomplish their tasks. And the same with farriers. I'm sure you've come across some farriers that had high levels of horsemanship and they could shoe a problem horse without a whole lot of trouble. And then there's other ones that'll take a good horse and make him a problem. That's a term I've never come up with a good way to articulate the meaning of, but through describing things like that, it sort of reveals the essence of it to me. I guess that brings us to the term natural horsemanship. And in my mind, you are certainly in the conversation of the founding fathers of the natural horsemanship revolution. And this is a question I say because I'm genuinely curious, and I hope that no part of what I'm about to say you find offensive. I will say that the term natural horsemanship to me seems to have almost been hijacked, and it has evolved over the last 10 or 15 years to come to mean expensive halters and not riding with spurs or having lead rope. Or, there's a whole movement now of no metal on the horse at all in any way, and things that I kind of find silly. And I was just wondering if you had noticed some of those fads, and if maybe you wanted to scold your figurative children real quick on this podcast, tell them to knock off the silliness.
Well, you've given me one example. Can you give me another one?
Of natural, well, there's definitely the movement now of no bits, no metal at all. In fact, there are a whole group of people that'll be quick to tell you that any kind of spur or bit or even a metal snap on the end of your lead rope that attaches to the halter, that all of those things are cruel and abusive and not in line with natural horsemanship principles. And I guess that's probably my biggest example. So I was just wondering, I don't know if you've ever encountered any of those people. I guess I'm probably a little more into the social media world and have to deal with those people than you probably do. But I guess that's probably the main group that I'm talking about right now. And it's a sizable group. It's hundreds of thousands of people for certain. Have you had to deal with any of that stuff?
No, let me say this. I started earlier on, and I said that I had seen you the first of your videos that you sent me.
Yes, sir.
Last night. I was very impressed with it.
Thank you.
And now I'm very impressed with what you just told me, because I wasn't aware of this anti-metal thing. I never heard of it before, frankly. And obviously, I think it's foolish. Do human beings overuse metal tools in the handling of animals? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The bit, the spur, the whip, anything can be misused and overused, and is and has been. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use them. The spur, for example, gives an extension of our heel and of our leg. And the spur is a very, very useful tool. It should never be used in anger, never be used indiscriminately. The bit, overused, absolutely. And yet that doesn't mean that you should not use the bit in training horses. No, it's a question of using these tools properly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so you and I are in a complete agreement on that.
I feel like if we're going to say that, this rider is overusing the bit or using it improperly, and so the solution is to put a mechanical hackamore on the horse instead, all we've done is given an uneducated rider a different tool. The education of the rider, to me, is the only solution in that paradigm. One of the examples that I really like is that you can take a brick and you can use it to build a school or a hospital or a church, or you can use that brick and bash in someone's skull. Neither outcome is the fault of the brick. And so that's kind of how I look at it. But there are people that logic and reason don't appeal to very much. So I think I just have one final question for you, Dr. Miller, and this is one just purely for you and your legacy. But what does success mean to you? You've certainly been a massively influential figure in this horsemanship world. So what makes you take a deep breath and feel satisfied when you look back on the results of your influence?
Well, I know, just as I've learned from a lot of great horsemen, truly great horsemen. I don't mean great because they've won so much, but because of their success in handling horses. The people in the natural horsemanship movement, who I'm sure you'll agree with me, have been a great influence in my life. And
It's helped the horse.
what?
Been good for the horse.
And good for the horse, yes. Yes. All I can say is what we're talking about in the so-called natural horsemanship, what we're talking about is how to get along with another living individual, a live individual. I don't mean a plant. I mean an animal. That could be a child. It could be your employee. It can even be your employer, your customer, your fellow human being. How we influence them is certain things that I have in common. One is understanding, compassion, empathy, sympathy, and certain things to avoid. Willful blind cruelty, which has been far too often a factor in dealing with animals and with people, with kids.
Yes, sir. Well, Dr. Miller, I cannot thank you enough for appearing on the podcast and having this discussion with me. It has been quite surreal, and it's truly been an honor to speak with you. And I hope we get to chat again somewhere down the road. I really hope you enjoy watching the rest of the video, and I would certainly be tickled on any thoughts that you have as you continue to watch it. So anyway,
I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of those videos. They're excellent.
Well, thank you. I take that as very high praise. I truly do. Well, thank you again for being on the podcast. And Mrs. Miller, you've certainly been an important part of it as well. So thank you for chiming in from time to time.
Well, I hope I didn't intrude too much.
Oh, no, ma'am. I tell you what, I have a question for you too, if I may be so bold. What has been the worst part of being married to one of these crazy horse people?
I think just him being gone so much and the hours, that's the worst part.
Yes, ma'am.
But outside of that, it's been a joy.
Yeah, my wife would agree with you that our spouses definitely pay a price for our passion, and I guess we thank y'all for that. Well,
but it's a shared passion. It's a shared passion. That's what's important.
Yes, sir. Does your wife?
Very important in our life. I'm sure it is in yours.
Yes, sir. Well, really, I guess you could say a large portion of the way your life turned out had to deal with your wife's horse passion before y'all met. If she hadn't been boarding that mare in Thousand Oaks, then no telling how different your life would have turned out. That's pretty neat. It really is. It's amazing how influential some small detail can be. I remember, I'll share this with you. Are you familiar with the butterfly effect, the theory of time travel? If someone were to be able to go back in time 50 years and they cause a car accident that wouldn't have otherwise happened, and how the ripple effect would travel through time, people think of, how one small change could affect all of that in the future. Yet those of us living in the present never seem to respect how much one small change can affect the future. So I guess that'll be my final thought for today. It's certainly been an honor to speak with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity very much.
Yes, sir.
And I didn't know your name, until very recently, and which surprised me because I have such contacts with the horse industry and especially with the natural horsemanship movement. I think you're a great asset to the movement. And as I said, I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of your video.
I appreciate that. I think I'm going to have to go have a little cry now or something. Well, once again, thank you very much for being on. I can't thank you enough.
And thank you.
Yes, sir. We'll see you next week for another episode of Adult Onset Horsemanship. I've been your host, Daniel Dolphin.